The shepherd's solitude, a rugged hillside in Bethlehem at dusk. David sits perched on a jagged rock, his weight shifted as he cradles a wooden lyre. His fingers, calloused from work, move with surprising grace over the strings. Nearby, a lamb wanders toward a steep ledge. Without breaking his song, David reaches out with his wooden staff, gently hooking the lamb's leg to pull it back to safety. He looks toward the horizon, his eyes reflecting the deep orange of the setting sun, sensing a change in the wind. The weight of the oil, a dusty courtyard in Bethlehem, surrounded by stone walls. Samuel, his white hair wind-whipped, tilts a ram's horn. A thick, fragrant oil spills out, coating David's dark hair and running down his forehead. David remains on one knee, his head bowed, hands clenched tightly on his thighs. Behind him, his brothers stand line their faces a mix of confusion and simmering resentment. David looks up, his eyes wide, as if he can suddenly feel the weight of a crown that hasn't been placed yet. The valley of decision, the dusty, bone-dry floor of the Elah Valley. Goliath looms like a tower of iron, slamming his spear into the ground to taunt the Israelites. David, tiny by comparison, doesn't flinch. He reaches into his leather pouch, his fingers selecting a smooth river stone by feel alone. He begins to whirl the sling. The sound is a low whistle that rises to a scream. He steps forward, planting his lead foot into the dirt, eyes locked onto the small gap in Goliath's helmet. The giant falls, the battlefield, moments after the impact. Dust clouds swirl around the massive body of Goliath, who lies face down in the dirt. David stands atop the giant's bronze-clad back. He reaches down and grips the hilt of the giant's own massive sword, struggling with its weight. He raises his free hand toward the terrified Philistine lines, let out a piercing war cry. Behind him, the Israelite soldiers burst from their trenches in a frantic, jubilant charge. The jealous king, a dim, torch-lit throne room. David sits on a low stool, eyes focused on his harp strings, playing a low, haunting melody. Above him, Saul sits gripped by a shadow, his knuckles white as he clutches a heavy iron spear. Saul's eyes track David's throat. Suddenly, Saul's shoulder twitches, the beginning of a throwing motion. David notices the shadow shift on the floor and subtly leans his body back, anticipating the strike without stopping the music. The Covenant of Princes, a stone balcony overlooking the city walls at sunset. Jonathan unbuckles his ornate sword belt and hands it to David. Their forearms are locked in a soldier's grip. David wears Jonathan's royal cloak over his simple tunic. They lean their heads together, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about Saul's growing madness. Jonathan places a hand on David's shoulder, a silent vow that his loyalty to his friend now outweighs his loyalty to his father's house. The hunted, a moonlit, rocky wilderness. David is a blur of motion, leaping over a fallen cedar tree. He has a bow slung over his shoulder and a quiver of arrows rattling against his back. He stops abruptly, pressing his back against a cold rock face, holding his breath. Below him in the ravine, the torches of Saul's scouts flicker. David signals to a few men hidden in the shadows behind him, pointing toward the higher ridges. The outlaw king, the mouth of the cave of Adullam, a fire roaring in the center. David sits surrounded by the mighty men, scarred, rough-looking warriors in tattered gear. One man holds out a piece of charred meat on a knife, David takes it, nodding in thanks. He is sketching a map in the dirt with a stick, showing them the mountain passes. The men lean in, their faces illuminated by the orange firelight, looking at David not as a fugitive, but as their commander. The test of mercy, the deep, damp interior of a limestone cave. Saul is hunched over, unaware, just feet away. David kneels in the shadows, his breathing shallow. He draws a sharp dagger, the blade glinting in a straight beam of light. Instead of striking Saul's neck, he reaches out with trembling fingers and slices a square of fabric from the hem of Saul's royal robe. He retreats into the darkness, clutching the cloth, a trophy of a life spared. The fallen gaze. A lush palace balcony at night. David paces the stone tiles, his royal purple robes flowing behind him. He stops at the edge, looking down into the courtyard of a nearby house. Below, Bathsheba is bathing by a fountain, the moonlight catching the water. David's expression shifts from idle curiosity to a dark, fixated hunger. He gestures to a servant standing in the shadows of the doorway, whispering a command that will change the course of his life. The broken pen, a private chamber, lit by a single flickering candle. David is stripped of his royal finery, wearing only a plain linen shirt. He is slumped over a desk, his forehead resting on his hand. A quill pen lies on a piece of parchment, surrounded by ink splatters. He looks at the words he has written. Against you only have I sinned, and a single tear falls, blurring the wet ink. The king is gone. Only the man remains. The golden presence, the gates of Jerusalem crowded with people. The ark, gleaming with gold and topped by cherubim wings, is carried on the shoulders of white-robed priests. David walks ahead of them, throwing handfuls of grain and incense into the air. The smoke billows up, catching the light. He looks back at the ark, his face glowing with a frantic, spiritual energy that ignores the royal protocol of the guards surrounding him. The holy fool, a public square in front of the tabernacle. David leaps into the air, his arms wide, spinning in a dizzying dance. He has stripped down to a simple ephod, sweat glistening on his skin. The crowd cheers and claps in rhythm. On a high palace window, his wife Michal watches with a sneer of disgust, but David doesn't look up. He throws his head back and laughs, completely lost in the act of worship. The passing of the scroll, the royal bedchamber, sunlight streaming through high windows. An aged David, his beard long and silver, sits on the edge of his throne chair. He holds a heavy scroll, pointing to the architectural drawings of the temple. Solomon, young and wearing a simple circlet, kneels at his feet, his hand resting on his father's knee. David speaks softly, his voice raspy, emphasizing a point with a shaky finger, while Solomon listens with intense, focused gravity. The final sunset. A quiet bedroom, the air still and warm. David lies propped up by pillows, his eyes half closed. His family and counselors stand in a semicircle, their heads bowed in grief. A single candle burns on the bedside table. David's hand, thin and veined, rests over his heart. He takes one long, slow breath, looking toward the window where the sun is disappearing. He smiles slightly, the harp player finally going to rest.